Howdy, y'all. Welcome to the Rainbow Crossing, a podcast where Gen X, Gen Z, and today a millennial discuss life's challenges and how we face them as queer people. We have these open conversations to foster a sense of community through different perspectives. My name is Julio Guzman, and with me is...
Daniel. And with us is our friend Nate.
Hi, I'm Nate Thompson.
Hi, Nate.
Welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be in my ancestral home.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We were talking earlier about our long history of friendship. We've been friends since, what did we say, 2008?
2008.
Yeah.
Julio, how old were you in 2008?
I was 10.
Oh, God.
Well, we were just barely older than that at that time.
Yeah.
And how long have you two known each other?
Since 2019?
Something like that. It was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like it was 2019.
Yeah, I was in the old house,
probably.
so that was 2019 for
Yeah,
sure.
probably when we met.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. I don't know how. Probably out in the streets, most likely.
I think we met you maybe through friends, and then you started dog sitting.
Yes,
Yeah,
I do remember
little
now.
baby Starkey. So
Miss him.
That's right.
And Linus.
yeah, Linus invites in
Yeah.
all of our pets.
All the dogs.
Yeah, you remember all of them. So yeah, it was good times.
Well, when you and I met, you were still in college.
I was
At
a senior.
UT.
Yeah.
And I think out of all of my friends have had the biggest glow up, honestly. I don't know, have you ever seen photos of Nate?
Is this when we cut to my 2008-9 photos?
Yes.
I'll send you some.
Yes, I think I've got some,
it's
actually.
wild.
I don't think you've seen them.
No.
You'll be startled to see the difference.
Yeah.
Like, you were just a baby. You were a baby
I was
gay.
a baby. I grew up in a loving, unhealthy household where food was very rewarding for us.
Yeah.
That's America for you.
Yeah, I spent the weekend with my family in Fort Worth, and I was telling them that, number one, you see where my sweet tooth comes from when you get around my dad's family. It's nonstop.
Yeah.
It was like we didn't have enough dessert, so mom just kept making more, and it's just like every meal ends with something sweet, not just at night.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was a pretty healthy at the end of college for sure, but I also I was unhealthy actually. I didn't work out.
Right.
I didn't run. I didn't eat healthy. I'd never touched a salad before,
Yeah.
and so I had not been making good, healthy choices until I hit my 20s.
Yeah.
And so, kind of going into last week's podcast a little bit,
bit.
episode of the whole body image thing. And I did mine in a very unhealthy way at first, and then got very healthy as I entered my late 20s. So,
Yeah.
one of my best friends is a registered dietitian, and she specializes in eating disorders. And for not to get too far into this topic, but she didn't diagnose me, but she made a lot of comments in my early 20s about how hey, this is too much too fast,
Yeah.
not eating enough. And I actually got a trainer when I was early 20, probably 23, 24, and I almost passed out my first two workouts. And he was like, how many calories are you eating? And I was like, maybe 1,000 on a good day. And he was like, that ain't gonna cut it.
Right.
Not in a 5'10" frame with your size.
Yeah.
And so started making adjustments at that point of okay,
Yeah.
let's give fuel to my body to be able to get good results. So, and then I've maintained it. I think I was fortunate that my genetics are pretty good. And so as I've gotten into my late 30s, I've been able to keep it up. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like 30s is where it's at. I'm
It
waiting.
is.
I'm waiting.
You're so close. Not really. Not really.
Just enjoy. You got
I
two.
am. I'm
two
enjoying
months.
life right now, but I just know 30s is going to be chef's
Yeah,
kiss.
you've got 2 months left, just at 25. So
Yeah.
just enjoy it.
Yeah, 30s is so fun. It has been wonderful. I know there's a lot of growth. I think there's a lot of you can be retrospective to being an adult. I think when you're in your 20s and you look back on your teens, you were just a teenager.
Yeah.
But when you're 30 and you look back on what do you learn from your 20s, you're like, no, I was an adult, and here's how I can start making even better choices as I get older. So, yeah, I've loved 30. It's been a good decade so far.
So, Nate, you do not live in Austin any longer.
I do. Well, people think that I still live here as much as they see me. No, I do not.
But you are still employed here in Austin.
Yes, that's correct. So
You're a bioengineer, right?
Yeah, I'm a biomedical engineer by education. I mostly do management now, but I've worked at the same company that I did my senior design for out of the University of Texas, and they hired me on when I was employee 13, and I stayed, and it's been 15 years, and I've loved it. And then I really wanted to move to Denver with my husband, and we wanted to get out of the heat and into the mountains, and they said, please stay. So I'm back all the time.
We were also office neighbors.
We
for a
were
while.
side by side. I see it Yeah. Every time I drive up and park, I'm like, I used to know someone who works here. Yeah. Occasionally I get asked how your office is doing, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I can't speak to that on camera. We'll talk afterwards.
We're gonna assume downhill since you've left.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we have you here to not talk about anything that you are educated on.
That's
other
correct.
than educated through life experiences. And today we're going to talk about religious trauma.
I don't know if I know any gay men who were raised in the church who would not, if you talk to them enough, describe their experiences somewhat traumatic. And I also think, like, my husband was not raised in the church, and he was not raised evangelical or Catholic or Christian in any way. But still, growing up in the South, where evangelicalism kind of predominates our politics and our culture, and our society has experienced traumatic experiences through it. And
I think it only feels traumatic when you're trying to fight that in between of, are you gay or are you not, or am I going to embrace it? I think that's where it feels like trauma. I think once you accept what you are, then it feels less as a burden, really.
Yeah,
in my
I think
opinion.
Internally, for sure. I think that as I came out, I definitely had more traumas that were being done to me by external forces, but my internal trauma was starting to release.
Right.
And I think from that point forward, I was learning skills to sort of reconcile my traumatic experiences and pasts.
Nate, I know you're a big fan of data.
Love it. Give me the numbers.
I know. As am I. So I looked up some data, and there's a lot of studies that have been done on the LGBT community in relation to religion. And there was a 2020 Gallup daily tracking survey that found 47% of LGBTQ adults in the U.S. are religious.
Wow.
So about half are religious currently. Now, that means that they attend church in some capacity, with 27% being moderately religious, so they attend church once a month or so.
Christmas and Easter only.
Maybe.
CEOs, yeah.
And 20% are highly religious, so they're there every week. If we break that down into age categories, 38.5% are 18 to 24-year-olds. 40%.
It's not that bad from what I was expecting.
Yeah, same.
40%, 25 to 34-year-olds are religious. 51%, 35 to 49-year-olds are religious. 56% of 50 to 64-year-olds are religious. And 65% of 64 and older are religious.
Because people start getting more and more scared of death as you start to get older, so they start gravitating towards something that's going to bring them comfort.
I think that's part of it. I think it's also that people who are of an older generation, Gen X, boomers, we went to church more at that age. So it's a combination.
So I don't know the statistics today, but I do know that like church attendance is going down per capita.
Right.
But yeah, I would wonder if like you normalize that to like not give it a look at this, just the averages. How does that compare to the rest?
Right.
But yeah, I do think there is some element to this too, because I was around some older family this weekend, and they definitely gravitate towards what brings them comfort and security.
Right.
And church brings that for a lot of people.
You definitely start thinking about it more as you get older,
sure.
as I
Like
can
what
attest
comes next.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think about it now at this age, but that's because I grew up very religious. Yeah. And now I'm less religious practicing something, but I'm more spiritual. I still like sit with myself and like these things of bringing good energy into the world.
I was going to ask, does the study say religious? Is that the quoted word?
It says religious, not
Yeah.
spiritual,
That's
religious.
That would be one thing. I would have imagined those numbers would have matched spiritual. I have a lot of friends who would not describe themselves as religious.
Well, for religious, you have to like practice and
Yeah.
worship a specific guideline and go through a specific
Right.
thing to.
Well, you have to attend. You have to like show up
Right.
to a service for you to have answered that question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and even like my mom, a churchgoer, I think she would describe herself as more spiritually Christian and not religiously Christian.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting. Those numbers are higher than I expected.
Same.
Yes. In addition to that same survey, LGBT adults of color are more likely to be religious than their white counterparts. Also, LGBT adults in the South are going to be more religious than those in the North.
Yeah.
So those were some interesting findings. There was a Pew Research Center did a survey in 2019 that said 26% of Americans identify as agnostic, atheist, or nothing in particular, just Americans in general, 26%. That was up from 17% just a decade earlier.
Yeah.
So that was 2019, but if you compare it to 2013, which means that these numbers are probably actually higher than what we have here, 48% of LGBT Americans have no religious affiliation. So 48% compared to 26% of Americans in general.
Yeah.
So there's a much higher percentage, almost double, from your average American to LGBT Americans. So of those LGBT Americans who are religious, 33% say there is conflict between their religious beliefs and their sexual orientation or gender identity. So those of us in our community who are going to church, a third of them, 1 out of every three, has a conflict internally between what they're practicing and what they're feeling. That's a lot of people.
It's alarming.
A lot of churches aren't as accepting, so I feel like the ones that they're going to are probably the most accepting kind of churches.
Yeah.
And even then, it's still sometimes a battle, I'm sure.
Well, there's a difference, too, between some words that I'd learned after coming out between acceptance and affirmation. And so I have a family that my parents affirm. And by affirm, I mean willingness to walk me down the aisle. They treat my husband as my husband, not as a partner or a roommate, which nothing wrong with those words or those descriptions, but they put him on equal footing as my sister-in-law, as my brother's wife, versus acceptance, which is like, I see you, I know who he is, I know what legally he is to you, but I don't see him as being an equal partner. Mm-hmm. And I think it's easier to find churches that'll put a rainbow flag out on Pride, like a business will, and will accept, versus a church that will affirm you and say, you are holy and you are God-inspired as a gay person because you are gay, and not like being gay is this part of you that we just sort of put into the shadows or the corner.
So growing up in religion, were you religious? Because there's one thing to be forced into it, or did you actually believe in all these things as well?
Yeah, I was definitely religious. I grew up in a family. My dad's dad is a revivalist minister, pretty well known. He's a Free Will Baptist, which is not the Baptist that you are probably familiar with. It's a little bit different, a little more conservative, not politically, but more conservative in terms of appearance and their rules. But he was a revivalist minister. My mom's family, deeply Southern Baptist. I was raised in a church on Monday Bible study, Wednesday night church, Saturday fellowship stuff, Sunday night. It was the central part of my culture from birth till I was 17. We left the church. And I will say that I was all in. I was a huge believer, but I was fortunate that my parents taught me to question a lot. And so there were several subject materials that my family just didn't believe in. One of them was creationism or intelligent design versus evolution. My parents were what I would call Christian evolutionists. So they did believe that this world was older than 6,000 years, which was unique for my church. So all that to say, I was taught to question, to be like, I don't know if I buy that, which was great.
Yeah,
so,
that's good.
But I bought in pretty heavily. I would have considered myself to have been a born-again evangelical Christian who witnessed to other people and attempted to convert other people. And it was the center part of my life until I got to high school.
Julio, what was your religious experience growing up?
So I didn't really understand religion until I moved to Texas, but even then, religion has been around me my whole life. My grandma was super religious, and my grandpa, for most of his life, is a pastor. And my mom, growing up, she would definitely try to take us to church, but it was her driving a big family of 5 people trying to find a specific church on her own. But we would church hop a lot. We would always try different churches. And then it wasn't until Texas where we really stayed here for a while and found a church that we started going to constantly, that I ended up going to constantly as well. And I ended up practicing there a lot and actually being really religious. And I would go same thing to church on Monday. Wednesday was youth, Thursday was prayer, and then Sunday was the normal service. And we would go every single week. And I had a problem with it a little bit with my sexuality, of course, because I've always known that I've felt different, but I still felt spiritual in moments. In the moments where there was prayer and praising, I did feel like a higher vibration of sorts. And sometimes I would get emotional, and sometimes I would embrace the good things that I felt. But then at other times it would feel really dark and like I'm out of place and I don't feel accepted by anybody. And just me being who I am is not going to work for anything.
Yeah. Did you have moments of feeling unloved? Like you weren't loved in that place?
Yeah. There was several moments where religion made me feel a little bit suicidal in thoughts. but not in a way where like I would have these thoughts and then I would obviously talk to myself and be like, I want to see the good in everything. So this isn't something that I need to do, but it's something that kept crossing my mind every time it kept being brought up that I was not meant to be the way that I am. So those were my experiences growing up, or what it felt like most of it. Now I practice it on my own way, trying to be kind and spreading love where I can, and practicing in my own unique way, and also understanding who I am is okay.
Yeah, I think it sounds like we all had a similar experience growing up, because I too was at church. Anytime the doors were open, we were there. It was the central focus of my parents' lives, and still is. I was not questioning as much as you were, but I also knew I was gay not as early as you did. So I think I fell somewhere in between the two of you, and there were definitely struggles with identity, struggles with trying to reconcile this religion with these feelings. And I think obviously our stories are not even unique to each other. So I feel like this is probably going to strike a chord with a lot of people.
Oh, for sure.
So as far as what religions people fall into, my last stats, LGBT Americans are primarily Christian, 25% Catholics, 28% Protestants, 24.5% are other Christian denominations, 2.5% Jewish, 2% Muslim. But I have a feeling that if we went around and talked to these people from all the different denominations, different religions, we probably would find a lot of the same stories.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Of praying that this would go away, of tears.
The concept of religion's like all the same. People pray, people talk to a higher self, and then there's a good and a bad to mostly every type of religion. So I feel like we all have that internal conflict of...
And I think there's so much of religion that has been used throughout civilization to explain the unexplainable.
Sure.
Right? Like the entire Greek pantheon exists to explain why the sun rises and why the tides happen. And I think modern religion is not all that different. And I think I did a lot of that growing up of like, God, explain to me why I am the way I am. Why am I attracted to this person? Because I am being told at church and by others that I trust, right? And I think there was so much of this that was coming from people I trusted, family members and ministers in the church, that this is wrong, it's sinful. And I felt like it was the fabric of my identity. Mm-hmm. Not the only facet, but one of the most important, right? And I was sort of realizing that in a pretty formative time. And yeah, it was terrifying at times.
We all start out isolated when we're growing up, and you don't know what you don't know. Mm-mm. And all you have are the people around you to tell you what's right, what's wrong, what you're supposed to be feeling, and so on. And since we were all in formative years going to the church, that was a big part of telling us what was right and what was wrong. And who were we to question that? Because we didn't have the resources and the community that we have now to understand that what we were going through wasn't an aberration. It actually is pretty normal. And as we discussed with our penguin and flamingo stories, it happens all throughout nature as well. Mm-hmm. So as we're going through this and we're just blindly wandering through adolescence, which everyone does, we're relying on people who don't understand what we're going through.
Yes.
And we can be, and perhaps should be, angry at people who have locked us in to a certain path that has created this trauma that we're talking about today. Yeah. But they were doing it out of ignorance.
Yes.
And they were, I think, for the most part, doing it because they wanted us to be saved, free from sin, and not go to hell.
Yeah. One thing my dad said shortly after I came out and kind of the dust had settled, I came out at 20, and they didn't take it super well when I came out, but they also didn't make drastic changes to my life. There were some considerations of, do we bring him home from college, or what do we do? But I was kind of an adult at that point. And so the dust had settled, and one of my dad's biggest hangups was that he was so ignorant. And that, I'd come out in 2007, but there weren't a lot of resources for me. There weren't a lot of gay role models, right? Like, I think Ellen had only come out recently, and
Right.
and everyone was kind of a novelty at that point in time. And one of my dad's biggest hangups was that he was never a resource for me, and that he didn't know how to be a resource for me. He didn't know where to even point me. Thankfully, I went to school here in a big city that had a very large network community of gays, and I was able to kind of network and make community here and learn. But I was learning kind of late in life about things that I do wish my dad had or my mom had been more educated in explaining to me, here's what sexuality is, and it's okay to be that way, because it was not okay to be that way.
Yeah. I didn't come out to my parents. They found out, deduced some things. And
Did they hear the turum?
we didn't have smartphones then.
I was more like,
Sending smoke signals.
It was yeah.
In the shape of.
Jesus. Where was I?
They found out.
Yeah, when they found out, it was not pleasant. And I had already found a book that talked about homosexuality in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think that may have even been the title. It talked about how some translations had been mistranslated, and it went into details about the very few mentions in the Bible about homosexuality and how it was not the sin that modern man was making it out to be. And I remember sharing that book with my parents, and their response was, "This isn't what we were taught."
Yeah.
And so that's what I was up against. I think that's what a lot of Christian families with gay children are up against, is that they just are going to believe what they're going to believe. And it's really, really hard to change someone's mind who hasn't experienced it and who has not been exposed to any other gay people. I was the first exposure to my parents that they knew of a gay person. And they have softened over the years to the idea, my mom more so than my dad. But those early days were hard. I was living at home and working for my dad. And so my whole life revolved around these two people. And I was given an ultimatum that if I didn't go to Christian therapy, not conversion, but Christian therapy, that I was no longer going to be a part of the family. So it wasn't just removing this support system and this love that I had received. It was also not having a job anymore or a home to live in. So, of course, I had to bide my time, play along for a little bit, and went to this therapist. And I was terrified of going because this was someone from a religious background, and went there fully expecting them to talk about conversion or how you can change or doing this or this. Meanwhile, I've spent the last 8 years trying to pray the gay away, crying at night because I couldn't change. And I actually had a really great experience at this therapist. It was the first time I'd ever been to therapy, and he was a legitimate therapist. He said, you're at an age where obviously your identity is pretty much set in stone. And I think most therapists would agree that the fundamental self is established at by 3, 3 to 5, somewhere in there. So conversion isn't going to change anyone at this point, and he completely understood that. But he did talk about, I still believe it's wrong, so celibacy, abstinence, spend your life alone or spend your life in a lie married to someone you don't have any legitimate feelings for. Those are your options. And so while I did feel somewhat relieved that he understood that what I was going through was legitimate, his solutions weren't anything that I weren't
viable,
interested in pursuing. Sure. My mom was just hysterical in those early days, and I remember her coming to me and saying, I'm losing my hair. I'm so stressed about this. And I loved my mother and still love my mother. And she is a very kind, loving person. Mm-hmm. But that reaction was so misinformed, and was so damaging to me in those early days. And to say to your child, if you don't do X, you are no longer a part of our family, that's something that has never really left me. And it's something that took me a good decade for me to be able to forgive them for. They never asked for forgiveness. They never said they were sorry for doing that.
It is interesting. My experience with Christians who've wronged me is that they have not asked for forgiveness, which is like the fundamental principle of their religion.
Right?
But I find that always interesting. Yeah.
So I really struggle. I haven't forgotten, but I have found a way to forgive and move past it. But it's always lingering there. And this was the catalyst to get me out of the house and to get my life as an adult really moving. And I met the person who I would spend the next decade with or so. And we moved away when he was going to dental school. And then when we were deciding where to move to after dental school, moving back anywhere near my family was an immediate no. I don't want to be, and I remember saying this to him, I don't want to be within driving distance of them. If they're going to come see me, they're going to have to let me know well in advance because there's going to be a flight involved. And it's really a shame that it came to that you feel this way about the people who gave you so much love as a child. Because I had a decent childhood. I mean, my parents were very loving and giving towards me. But it was this one aspect that they could not understand and didn't try to understand.
I think that's the kicker too.
Yeah.
There's so many things in my life I don't understand, but I seek to understand it.
Right.
And in my experience, kind of going along with the story of your mother saying something that ends up being so harmful. After I'd come out, my brother, sister-in-law, everyone knew in my family. My now husband and I had started dating. We were starting to seriously date, and he was considering moving in. I got this call from my brother saying, hey, my wife and I are going to be in town for a conference. I want to meet with you. We have something important to talk about. And then I got a call from my mom to prepare me that he was going to tell me that my husband and I could no longer be around the kids. At the time, my niece was, I would say, 7 or 8. Mm. My nephew was 3 or 4. And my niece had started asking questions. When is Uncle Nate going to get a wife? When is he going to have kids so I can have cousins? Like, she started to ask these questions. And my brother did not know how to answer these questions. And so rather than try to answer them with any form of honesty, he decided to just bury it and just said, you and Matt cannot be around the kids. And he said, you're an overwhelmingly positive force for them, but I am convinced that if they choose the same lifestyle, they will be divorced from God. He sought counseling at his church, and ministers at his church that he went to backed him up on this. He said, you and Matt cannot be around the kids, which put me in I had to make choices of, do I bring Matt home at Christmas and divorce the family, or do I tell Matt to stay back? And this was early on in our relationship, so that made sense for 1 or 2 holidays.
Sure.
But then it started getting to where, like, Matt and I are engaged now, and I'm going to spend it with my fiance and now husband. And the thing my dad said that I thought, go tease off to this story, is what my brother did was signal to his kids that there is something you can do to divorce you from your father. And my dad kept saying, I can't understand this because there is nothing you could do that would cause me to love you any less, even if I don't understand it. What your brother is showing his kids is there is something, and it is being gay. And I can't imagine what those kids must feel. I don't think that they're queer. They have not, that was 10 years ago.
Right.
So as they've gotten older, they've not shown me what I would say are signs of being queer. But if they are, they know that their father is not a resource to them, even though we've reconciled.
Yeah.
My mom relates it always back to, like, setting a poor witness. She loves to say, like, that's not what Jesus would have done.
Right.
Whether I put as much focus as my mom does, and if that's makes it morally right if Jesus would have done it or not, is beside the point. She's right. My brother was doing something that didn't even jive with his own religion.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think I've had a moment where someone around me or church or anyone has said something to where I felt discomfort, like as y'all's 2 examples.
Yeah.
It's more of like I've just felt disappointed from God is what I felt. I like anytime, because I mean, I was still religious, and even now I'm a little conflicted. I've been thinking these things for my whole life. And it's like I grew up learning about God and him spreading love and the way that he wants to live life and the way we should be living life and the way that he died for our sins and that no sin is greater than the other. And when I'm trying to practice that and then them saying, okay, well, if you're gay, you're going to burn in hell and he's going to unleash hell on earth and everyone who is sinning is going to die. And I'm like, my loving God doesn't do that. So who are you telling me is going to do this? And that's where I felt even more conflicted, because I'm like, in these moments where I'm down on myself, who am I praying to? You know, am I praying to that God, or am I praying to someone who I feel is my God, which is a more loving energy? So that's where I felt most conflicted when people would describe to me about church. And now, I mean, my whole family comes from a lot of dark times, so I've never felt any negative input from them when it comes to religion. Most of them are still religious. My mom still goes to church. My oldest sister goes to church with her family. My nephew is super religious. That hasn't crossed anything yet. I don't even know if he even knows about me and my lifestyle, but it's who I am. And eventually he's going to come to terms with, I'm just a normal human, just as he is, and who you live.
One thing I experienced in my family, because I come from a long line of Christians of a variety of types, is that family members of mine who have struggled a lot in their lives and religion is their hope accepted me more readily than family members who sort of have had fairly easy lives. And for them, it's a system of code and ethics. And so I wonder, because you just said that your families come from some dark times, if maybe some of their reliance on Christianity as a message of hope is why they don't get too hard on you, and hopefully you don't have to experience that. Hopefully, you get to see your
they still
nephew.
ask questions. There's been moments in my life where they've asked questions, but I've never felt like they are condemning me to hell.
That's great.
Is the thing, which is nice. They've always been very accepting of it, and maybe they might not understand, and maybe they feel sad for me at times, because I mean, it's been lonely out here, and I complain a lot about my sexual orientation to them at times, and they tell me that I've been this way my whole life, and that's who I am.
They probably see your gayness then as a fabric of who you are. It took my family like a decade to realize that it is who I am. And then I think that has helped them. I've reconciled with all of my family now. I saw actually all of my family who wronged me, I got to see this weekend with Matt. And they treat Matt, it's weird. There's some awkwardness for sure. Matt and I are careful not to kiss in front of them or not to be too affectionate, which is always bizarre for me because I hate having to code switch, but it is the reality.
Yeah.
But I've reconciled with them all, which is great. So
It's baby steps sometimes.
Yeah.
We are educating our families.
And the kids are only getting smarter, honestly.
Right.
Like, they'll start to find things out on their own.
my niece found my wedding book, and she was like, "Who's the husband?" Like she got it. And she goes to a little Christian academy and is partially homeschooled.
Yeah.
So she really isn't exposed to a lot of the world, and she got it pretty quick.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 years ago, my oldest niece, she's about like 15 now. I think she was 11 at the time. She goes, "You remind me a lot of James Charles." Not that I because I was projecting that, but I think that was her only image of like a gay person, and I was also younger, so she just felt the energy. And when she said that, I was like, "Don't ever say that again." But I understand what you're saying.
Yes, that's funny.
Several years ago, there was a video going around, and it was a gay couple, and one of them went to his niece, who was probably 5 years old at the time, and said, "Hey, I just want to tell you that, Uncle so-and-so, we're married, right?" And she was like, "Yeah, okay. When's dessert?" Like, there was something like that.
Yeah.
It was so nonchalant, because kids don't care. They care about being loved and having their needs met.
Yes.
And if you extend love to them and interest to them, that's what they need.
We, as people, overcomplicate love for so many reasons when it's so simple.
Yeah.
Everyone understands the feeling of love. So, like, for a kid to understand that two people can love each other isn't that crazy.
Right.
I think we're making it more intense than it really needs to be.
And I think in my brother's case, I've been accused of being an apologist for him at times, because my brother is an overwhelmingly great person. I think he's a role model. I really look up to him. I think he's wonderful. But in his case, he saw me as a positive force for my niece and nephews, and thought if I opened the door for that to be a possibility in their lives, that they might see Uncle Nate and be like, "Oh, I want to be queer." Because he thinks that it can be an on-off switch. Someone could just choose.
Right.
And whether or not we choose to be gay or what level we choose, not really the topic here, but he didn't want to even open the gateway for that to be possible for them, or to use me as a resource of like, I'm feeling these feelings, what does this mean?
Yeah.
Because he didn't understand.
It's maybe mildly off topic, but I do think it is highly related to it, and I think that's where the whole groomer conversation comes from these days, from religious people who just don't understand that's not the way it works. Like we are not going to convince children, nor do we want to become gay. They are going to decide based on their internal feelings about whether or not they're gay.
Yeah.
Now, us being gay role models might allow people to feel like I can come
That's it.
out,
Yeah.
but it's not going to say, I want to become gay. I'm going to become, it's not so trendy that someone is just going to decide, I want to go against every instinct inside of me to be with the opposite sex and go to the same sex just because it's trendy. That's absurd. Mm-hmm. And I've never, ever understood how people do these mental gymnastics to get to that point when they never made a choice. They just had a feeling and they went with it. And if they did make a choice, then that's telling that they have not lived their true, authentic lives.
Also, curiosity is a normal thing, especially for kids. Sure. Yeah. And it's how we handle the curiosity is the main factor. Because if your kid is asking questions about something, help them understand it instead of just being like, no, this is how it is, moving on. Like, or they're just curious.
Hypothetically, my nephew, so I have a nephew who's 12. If he starts asking questions about the attractiveness of boys, I could be a resource to him of being like, can you walk him through what this might mean? Can you help him understand? Or can you just let him know it's going to be okay? And I think that for some Christians, they just don't want it to be okay.
Right.
Like fundamentally, he just doesn't want his kids to be gay. Yeah. That's what he really didn't want, is I don't want them to be gay. Yeah. How do I reduce that risk?
Thinking back on when my parents found out that I was gay, and there were numerous reasons why they were unhappy with this situation. I think probably the this is a sin was at the top of the list. HIV was still big at that point in time, and there was concern that I was going to get this deadly disease, of course. But I also think that there were other factors that had nothing to do with me and how I was going to live my life, gay, straight, or otherwise, and it was, we want grandkids, and you're not going to give us grandkids. How do we explain this? This is embarrassing to us now. And it really frustrated me that they were projecting their needs onto me and the life that I was trying to live.
I was going to say, so far, the stories you've told have been very much like, your gayness has affected me in this negative way. Right. And I find a strong through line in a lot of my experiences with religious people of, your coming out has affected me in this way. And I'm like, what about me? I'm the 16-year-old coming out. Like, what about me here?
Right.
Shouldn't you have care there about what my safety, security, and needs are?
And especially the number of gay teens that have suicidal thoughts. I mean, I did. And going through depression and the anxiety of having to deal with this situation, and how do I get through this hurdle, and let alone like how do I forge a path in this life that I'm trying to make when I don't even have resources to understand anything about it. I've got enough problems on my own. I would actually like your help in this, but I'm not getting any help. In fact, I'm just getting more problems from you.
What's interesting is that they say God knows our life before we even experience it. He knows how we're supposed to experience our life and everything that's going to happen in our life. It is already written, and that's what it's going to be. So he knows what we're supposed to experience. And if people really do think that, of course, if gay people are starting to be more born and all that, and evolution is happening, he's probably placing on this earth what the earth needs. Yeah, it's to be fruitful and multiply and have people and have kids, but there's a lot of other things that are going on, and maybe we need to slow those things down, and maybe it's part of nature that all of these things start to happen, where maybe more people are becoming more comfortable accepting their homosexuality. And I think if God is still creating everybody, as people like to think,
if you fundamentally,
are we normal?
If you
We're
fundamentally
normal.
do believe that there is a higher power that is orchestrating our lives, then explain my experience being gay at the same time you tell me it's wrong. Like, I don't know how those things jive. And I think that because it's so unknown, it's what scares them.
Exactly.
I think it just terrifies them. They don't understand it.
Well, religion has handed them all the answers without there having to be a critical thinking process.
Yeah.
So this requires some thought that strays outside of the acceptable answers, and of course it frightens them. But people just don't understand the damage that it's doing to us. And I want to just briefly mention a few of these other traumas that we haven't really touched on. There's internalized homophobia that can come from...
I still struggle with it, and I'm 38.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
same. I'm not 38, but I struggle with it.
Technically, I'm not either. I just aged myself I aged myself 2 months.
None of us here are 38. yet. Abuse can come from religious traumas.
Emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual
Absolutely.
abuse. Yeah, common
Absolutely.
in the church.
We briefly touched on it, conversion therapy. I can't imagine what it's like to go through conversion therapy.
I tried it in my head by myself, but not actually someone doing it to
Sure.
me.
Sure.
Having an external source tell you you're not loved in this way, you must change.
Right.
I can't
Yep.
wrap my head around it.
Yep. Yeah. Expulsion from the church. Plenty of people have been thrown out. Expulsion from your family. So just the idea that, especially if you're a teenager and whose life, as ours did, revolves around the church up to a certain age, to be removed from the only community that you really know, I wasn't prepared. You knew a lot of things at a young age, and you were, as we discussed in our man episode, you were a young man at an early age.
Yeah.
I was not. I would not have been prepared at 17 or 18 to live a life on my own. I didn't know anything about anything. So just the idea that to have had all of that removed at that age, terrifying. And we do see a lot of homelessness in LGBT youth.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, of course, is another potential trauma. There's the increased risk for suicide, for substance abuse, anxiety and depression, as we mentioned already. And then there's just the PTSD that can actually manifest itself in physical form. I read an article earlier today about a guy who has erectile dysfunction because he was drilled in him, this is wrong, your decisions are wrong. I don't know that he did conversion therapy, but sometimes just being in a church and having them tell you this enough is essentially the same thing. And so he has sworn off just being in a relationship because he can't perform on any level. And he also has in the back of his mind, as part of PTSD, that even if he does get married and has kids with a same-sex partner, that he would have to, on his deathbed, repent of having lived this life in order to not to go to hell. Yeah. There's so many ways that religious trauma can manifest itself. And before this, we were talking about not only these different types of trauma, but we were talking about trauma with a capital T and trauma with a lowercase t.
Yeah, I think that the reconciliation process and coming to terms with religious trauma starts with therapy. And when I first went into my very first therapy session, at this point 11 years ago, I went in and said, I've never experienced trauma before. That's what I told her, because she was trying to work through what are your traumatic experiences. And what I eventually worked out with her is that I had never experienced trauma with a capital T. So those are things like divorced parents or food instability or financial instability, death of a loved one, abuse. I had never experienced those things as a kid.
Like check.
Yeah. So I had never experienced this. So I thought I didn't have traumas. So why am I the way I am? And then I started realizing I had suffered a series of just a lifelong of small t traumas that resulted in a lot of weird manifestations for me, like internalized homophobia or shame of sex, even with my husband. That led me to do some really strange things and sometimes unsafe things when I was younger.
Julio and I were talking before this that we didn't really suffer any trauma. We were like, do we use the word trauma today? And then you came in and you solved that for us with our in-house therapy session with you. I am
not a licensed therapist.
But the idea that trauma takes all
forms,
sizes.
Yeah,
sure.
I feel fortunate to some degree that I'd never suffered capital T traumas.
Right.
But I had to learn that a lot of my actions, behaviors, personality traits were because of a lot of small t traumas. Yeah. And once I came to terms able to name it and then work through what those traumas were, I started realizing I had trust issues.
Right.
I have intimacy issues. And so I had to work through those things. And it's still a work in progress.
Yeah. But you can work on it now.
Now I can work on it. I can name it. I can work through it. It enabled me to reconcile with my family. They never asked for forgiveness, but I was able to forgive them because I've worked through that traumatic experience. And not everyone needs to reconcile with someone who has wronged them. In my case, I was able to, but the opportunity exists for people to get help.
And you did it for you.
Correct.
So, let's talk briefly about how we can support LGBT youth that are currently in religious settings. They're living at home. They may not have the ability to leave. They may not have the support system to leave. So I think one of the first things that they should do is ask, should I come out to my family?
Am I safe?
Am I safe?
Am I physically safe?
Do that. And they may or may not know the answer. I think if you're in a religious household, you may suspect what the answer is.
Yeah.
If the answer is no, I shouldn't come out to my family, who can I talk to? And if you're at school, you should have a school counselor there.
Find your English teacher.
Yeah.
So many gays have an English or a theater teacher, right? Who changed their lives. Mine was an economics teacher.
Mine was an English teacher. Yes, absolutely.
My theater teacher.
Yeah.
She's great.
They are doing the literal Lord's work.
Yes. So find somebody who, and if you can have it be a mentor, an adult, a counselor type person, I think would be ideal, versus a friend who hasn't really experienced any of life yet to really, really know.
And if you're feeling like conflicted with yourself instead of with someone else, like if you're feeling conflicted with your spirituality and who you are as a person, know that your connection with God is your connection with God. 100%. Whatever you preach with him and pray with him is your connection with him. So anybody else's input doesn't matter. He already knows you. He already understands you, and he can love you the way you are. So just accept that yourself
100%.
and practice it on your own.
If you are considering coming out to your family, I think an important question is, do you have a safe place to go if it goes wrong? Like, have a backup plan. And it's crazy to think at 15, 16, you got to be thinking about where else can I live? But if you are considering coming out and you know that your family could potentially turn you away, have a plan in place. And a lot of this information comes from a great nonprofit organization, the Trevor Project, which they have an online chat. They have phone operators. If you need anyone, they are, I believe, the world's leading suicide prevention
and
crisis
intervention. Professionals that will help you.
Yeah.
People who've seen this before, done this before, and can help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're a great resource for our LGBT youth. But what about our LGBT adults who are dealing with PTSD?
Or still in the closet.
Still in the closet. What can they do to move forward?
My first recommendation, I've already mentioned therapy, is find a therapist, but find a therapist who will understand that side of you. So my current therapist is a queer poly woman who used to be evangelical. So she checks a lot of boxes for me. And so she's breathed my experiences before. So she understood the language. And that was really helpful for me. My previous therapist was not a former evangelical. She was lovely, but I couldn't connect with her on that level. So I found a therapist that connected with me. And shop it around. Don't feel like your first therapist is your only therapist.
Yeah, no.
Shop it around and find one that fits you. I think that's great. Read The Velvet Rage. I think that's an excellent book for a lot of, not necessarily directly religious, but excellent book that all gay men should read.
Because just because they're therapists doesn't mean they're actually going to understand you.
That's
and
correct.
where you come from. So keep your mind open.
It's important that sometimes we, as you had to do, cut people out of our lives who are not serving your wellness, your happiness. And as we also mentioned, practice forgiveness if you find that it suits your best interests.
Yeah.
If you can forgive and move on, it doesn't mean you have to forget, and it doesn't mean you even necessarily have to have that person in your life anymore. It took me a decade, but to forgive my parents for saying, you got to do this or you're not a member of our family anymore. Once I found it in my heart to forgive, it lifted a burden off of my shoulders. I don't know if it's a burden for them or not, but it lifted my burden. And that's what we're talking about here.
Centering yourself.
Yeah. And if you're still religious, maybe find an affirming church.
That's a big one, is find affirming resources.
Right. Not just, as you brilliantly explained earlier, not just an accepting church who will allow you to come in, but an affirming church who allows you to be your true, authentic self.
And if you use the language, affirm and acceptance are commonly used in the church circles, and so that language can help you find. You're doing an LGBTQ affirming church search on Google in your local areas can help.
But you also don't need to go to a church to practice your own spirituality.
No.
If you find community there, that's great and lovely. I never did. I never went back and never found it again. But some people have, and it's been a beautiful thing to see, because community's great, but...
One of my last ones was just community, which doesn't have to be a religious community, but to find your community, to form new friendships, to form new bonds, which of course we talk about on here all of the time. Find your community, find your support system, and be a support system for somebody else.
That's huge for me, is being able to be a support system at times.
I mean, the thing that has stuck with me the most about religion is probably loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
that's
That
how
is
I
the fundamental principle.
That's how I lead
love your
life,
neighbor as
and I don't know.
yourself.
I don't understand why so many Christians struggle to do that, because it's
Yeah.
literally just love the person in front of you. Don't judge them, accept them.
And you'll be
Simple.
amazed at how much better you'll feel when you do it.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to practice it, because
Yeah.
sometimes people do make you a little angry.
Yeah.
But you can love them. That's still the world I'm trying to create. Is the thing.
Exactly.
Like that's what I want too. Like, let's get it there.
I know. Well, we're starting today,
Yeah.
and we have a friend here who we love.
Thank you for both being part of my community too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean,
love ya.
you and I were a support system for each other.
We trauma bonded. For sure.
We did.
Here we are again, trauma bonding again.
Yes, yeah.
I wasn't born yet, apparently.
It was just 10 years ago. But thank you, Nate.
I appreciate
for
you guys
joining
having
us
me.
today.
This has been
We
wonderful.
love you.
This was so great, and I hope this helps some people
Yeah,
out there.
me too.
Because this is a challenge for a lot of people. So please like, follow, comment, and we'll see you next week.
Woo.